ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of Sessions with Koren. Week after week, we bring you real conversations about real issues, the ones that hit close to home and deserve our full attention. Today, we're shining a light on a topic that's often whispered about, but rarely addressed head-on. Young people who run away from home. What's really going on? What are they running from, or what are they running toward? And what can we do to support them before it's too late? Joining us shortly is Feona Charles Richards, an advocate for family and youth development and the Director of Family and Social Services. She is here to share her insights, her experiences, and some of the tough truths that we need to hear. Don't go anywhere, we will be right back. Welcome back to Sessions with Koren. Joining us in the studio is Feona Charles Richards, a passionate advocate for family and youth development and the Director of Family and Social Services. With years of experience in social work and community empowerment, Feona is dedicated to supporting vulnerable families and creating safer spaces for our children to thrive. Feona, always a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so the first thing I want to ask you, what are some of the biggest reasons that our youth run away from home?
Well, Koren, most of the times our children are going through a lot, and very often we don't talk about those things enough. Our children are experiencing a lot of emotional stress in home. Sometimes there are family conflicts that place them snap in the middle of that dynamic. We have situations where our children have been exposed to sexual assault, physical assault, and in some instances, they have no voice in the spaces that they should feel safe. And one of those spaces is home.
Absolutely. That's such a pity. What about things like conflict or rigid parenting? How do these things make a difference, or even neglect sometimes?
You know, that thing where we do as parents now, where we do our best not to make the mistakes that our parents make, but we end up making the worst mistakes that our parents make.
Cycle.
Right. And a lot of times a friend of mine coined this statement the other day, Mona, and she said, a lot of parents are trauma parenting. And that is very, very true for a lot of parents. They have been exposed to sexual assault themselves. They would have been exposed to family settings where they couldn't have a voice. They weren't able to express themselves. And as a result of that, they may overly allow their children to have freedoms that expose them to a lot of dangers, or they may be rigid, as you would have indicated, and completely sheltering or helicopter parenting. So their children, so it's everything that the child cannot do. They think they've made all the provisions, so they work extra hard, they make sure all the resources are there, etc. However, they do not communicate with the child. They have absolutely no clue what the child is facing. And in some instances, they are aware and they say, we're not going to talk about that. And so as a result of that, we have children who have been exposed to somebody inappropriately touching them, somebody inappropriately having certain conversations with them that they really shouldn't be having, but then mommy says, be quiet about it, or we're not going to talk about that. And so where our children should feel safe, it's not just the whole idea of rigid parenting, but also the fact that some parents are trauma parenting or just oblivious to the fact that the emotional aspect of their children is very, very minimal in consideration.
Yeah, I can see that sometimes, and we'll get back to how we can help those parents. Sure. But on the topic of trauma parenting that you're talking about, some of our young persons do experience trauma themselves from things like abuse, things like bullying, even grief. What role does that play in terms of making them feel like they need to run to someplace else?
You know, and the thing about it is the people who they're running to know exactly what their needs are. Right. So we have in the instances of grief, the one person within your family that you could talk to. So grandma died, and there's now nobody to talk to. There's nobody to share those emotions, those experiences at school where you did get bullied, or your teacher said something inappropriate to you, or your teacher spoke down to you in front of the class, or made you feel very small. And so that safe space, which was either a grandparent or a great aunt, etc. And loss isn't just about demographics, because we have persons who grieve loss when persons travel overseas, and that close-knit relationship they once had is no more. And then sometimes it's the parents too. So a parent leaves and children are left here. So when a child experiences some sort of loss, for example, as you said, either the person has died or the person has left the area, we will see a lot of our children turn inward. So when our children cannot express their feelings to anyone around them, they first turn inward.
Yes.
Because unlike us who are adults, and sometimes we as adults fail in doing this badly too, in terms of processing emotion and self-regulating, a lot of our children are not at the capacity to do that very well. And so in their ability their processing is to go inward. Now, somebody at the bus stops meet them and starts chatting them up, or offers them a ride, or offers them a $5, or offer them just space, yes, to be able to say what happened at school today, etc. And it could be the situation where the person, as I said, they study our children sometimes better than we do, in that they may just sit there and just hold space,
yes,
and ask you okay, and show simple concern. And now our child has somebody that mommy doesn't know, daddy doesn't know, teacher doesn't know, auntie doesn't know, that they're now confiding in.
Yes.
So now this person is completely outside of the scope of the home. And this is where their safe space is now.
Wow.
Now, what happens when they have complete trust in a person that you don't know?
Imagine that.
Yeah, that makes them feel safe, yes, in a way they have not felt in a long time.
Yes, you've said so many things in that one comment. You talked about the grandmothers. You and I have talked about that, losing our grandmothers, and the impact they played in our life. So we understand that feeling of loss.
Yep.
Because we've talked about that.
Yeah.
And we mentioned persons going away. Another thing that has affected some of our youth is migrating to Antigua and losing their comfort and their security and being here with a limited support system, a parent working 2 jobs to take care of them, but cousins, grandparents, and the extended family is away. That's another area where it's a loss. And you mentioned turning inwards, and that reminds me of the children who start cutting. But we don't have time for that conversation. That's a whole other conversation, right?
Yes.
But another thing I want to ask you is, and parents need to hear this, what are some of the risks? And our young persons who are listening also need to hear this. What are some of the risks they face when they run away from home and they're on the street or with these strange persons?
I don't know if you saw the play for Zara. Zara did a play sometime last year, and it talked about the whole idea of trafficking of our young children. And I'm not gonna lie, I got quite emotional, because for me, when you work in this field and you are exposed to all the dark stories, it resonates a lot with you. And so a lot of our children have no idea that sometimes a person is befriending them because they're hoping to get them in a situation where they can send them somewhere else to prostitute. And sometimes even locally, because let's not go in the dark thinking that it doesn't happen 2 streets down from us, right? There's some communities that have what they call trap houses. And what we call trap houses is where the cocaine gets snorted by lots of our young people, marijuana use, the different substances that are, on our streets currently. And some of our children get exposed to those settings and become addicts themselves, right? Before even reaching the age of 18. And we've had some real horror stories. I mean, I remember one of our youngest cocaine snorter was 9.
Wow,
right?
That's something else.
Yeah, don't be looking at me like that. I'm so serious.
I know,
I'm so serious. 9 was our youngest.
Yeah.
His mom was an addict.
It's hard.
Right. So in some situations, we have our children as young as 9 exposed to substances. Somebody who was close to the mother exposed the child. And so it's super important for our children to know that you can become an addict. And even though, you know, in your later life, you can get over it and you can go through recovery, the implications that it has on your quality of life, your education, your ability to be employable, you know, your ability to even have a family, make those connections, etc. Those things are extremely lower in terms of how able your ability to access that. So if you are a person who wants to be able to become an astronaut, to become a mechanic, there must be an ability to focus, to make connections, and if you are exposed to substance at an early age, the percentage of that is lower.
Absolutely.
Then, of course, for girls, the risk of pregnancy.
At 13 and 14.
At 13 and 14, yes, we are seeing that a lot. So you're starting a family extremely early, but which also increases your percentage rate of cervical cancer and HPV virus and a lot more STIs and STDs that we want to talk about today. And our boys as well, because our boys are targeted and we don't talk about that enough. But our boys as well are also sex trafficked. In addition to that, so we have the pregnancy, we have their exposure to substances, we have your ability or inability to get a job, etc., make connections with other people, and of course, their mental health factor.
Oh, yes.
So a lot of our children who have been exposed to situations like that either end up with bipolar disorder, schizophrenia in some instances, if your family members had a history of schizophrenia, and in other instances, major depressive disorder.
I've seen that.
Yeah, and those are self-harming diagnoses. So a lot of persons who have bipolar and schizophrenia along with major depressive disorder are have extreme suicidal ideation. And so that even creates another factor. So your family is not just grieving you once because you ran away, they're grieving you because of all the other things that happened as a result of that.
Yeah, it's really devastating for our young persons. Yeah. So now that we've discovered what most of the problems are, we're going to look at some solutions. So we have a lot of churches in Antigua and Barbuda. We have community groups, we have schools, we have neighbors. What can everybody do? Because sometimes we tend to say, oh, government has to. Okay, so we have government, but we have schools, we have churches, we have community groups, we have neighbors. What can they do in terms of us looking at this problem holistically and everybody trying to help?
So let me first applaud our teachers who are supportive, kind, caring, and mind your children's business, because it's truly important to recognize that when your student who was a high achiever suddenly starts falling down in class, that's a red flag.
That's a red flag.
When you're a student who was extremely vocal and not necessarily the most quiet, very sociable, etc., now becomes extremely withdrawn and quiet. So they say, you know what, let's what's going on with you, So I really applaud the teachers who do that, and they say, hey, you know what, go talk to so-and-so, go call, I remember one time at a particular school, one teacher encouraged all the students to profile what was happening with the child.
Okay.
Take pictures so there was evidence, since mom was extremely, really good at hiding how she was able to hurt the child. And the students did that, and they were the ones who made a report.
Okay.
So I commend environments within the school setting that allows for children to be able to say what is happening and provide the support they need to be able to allow for intervention early. One of the other things so being observant and being curious and interested in the students is extremely important. Another thing that we can do as it relates to our community groups, etc., I find that we are not reaching the children who actually need help.
Okay.
And I run the risk of getting into trouble when I say that.
That's all right.
But at the same time, think about it. Our children who you're hosting an after-school program, but the eldest child is responsible for picking up the youngest child from school and taking them home. That's what happens in our vulnerable communities. That's just the general rationale behind there. Mm-hmm. Mom is at work, dad is at work. Half of the time they don't have no vehicle. Mm-hmm. And if they do, it's because the parent is transitioning between jobs or whatever the case is, and it makes it easier. So how are they going to get to the clubs?
Yes.
How are they going to get to the clubs? Mm-hmm. I remember one time approaching one of our clubs and saying to them, how do we help in transitioning my boys from DBRC, and how can you allow for mentorship, whatever the case is? And they go, but one of our criteria is that you can't have a criminal record.
Wow, but those are the ones who need it most, right?
Right. So, we have to be very mindful about what our criteria are that allows for inclusion. Mm-hmm. So there has to be some sort of inclusivity that allows for our vulnerable children who doesn't have a rich auntie, who doesn't have a rich uncle to get them into the program, or allow for them to have access.
You can't have registration fees.
Right.
And having to take transportation to get to you.
Right.
And
there
the
you
dress
go.
code has to be this and that.
And then it's going to happen after school most of the times, on weekends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they need to be helping.
Yes. Right. That's not gonna work. Okay. So if we're targeting vulnerable populations, then we have to reconsider what exactly are the needs of our vulnerable, and truly address that. And then our programs need to be sustainable. Okay. One of the issues I have when we get funding is that funding is only for a year. Mm-hmm. And then after funding, what happens to the program, right? And so sustainability, and I know a lot of times, and corporate might feel the kind of way right now when they make this statement, but when we send out those proposals begging for money, it's not because we want to harass you for your money. You understand? It's a situation where government is never going to be able to sustain anything forever. Okay. Let's just be real. Partnership is going to be important. Mm-hmm. I mean, if our focus is paying salaries and ensuring that some of our programs internally are maintained and sustained, then their larger programs need partnership. Yes. So corporate, I need you on board.
Absolutely.
We need you on board. In addition to that, when it comes to our churches, I know there are a lot of subjects that are taboo, but those are the subjects that we need to talk about. Those are the conversations that we need to have. And a space where our children can truly feel safe, expressing themselves without being disrespectful, and expressing themselves in a way that is in keeping with the values and morals of the setting, but allowing for the conversation.
Yes.
And so those are just some things that we can do. And the neighbors, stop closing your windows and pulling across the curtains and ignoring when you hear the child has been screaming for the whole week, beef and blows.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? When you notice that a particular child that does not live in your neighborhood is going into a particular house on a regular, it's time for us to speak up. Yes. And I don't know, since when we adopted all these Western behaviors, because we were never like that.
No. It was everybody's business.
Listen, I remember my mother used to call every afternoon when I just started driving and said, Fiona, you were speeding? And I said, Mommy, no, I wasn't speeding. But somebody told me that you were speeding, and it was annoying, but I knew that, in our road or in South, persons were looking out for you,
It's a protective measure.
Right. But now, parents, we also have to be very open to hearing the criticisms that make us really uncomfortable about our own children. Yes. Because it means that something is happening, and you can't be, where am I being busy for? No, because something is happening, you're not around, and somebody's seeing, and take it as somebody's interested enough to say something.
Absolutely.
So even the parents, behavior when somebody says something also needs some shifting. So those are just some things that I can mention today.
That's a lot. And I want to piggyback on something you said for the churches, having the conversations. And I feel like sometimes churches can ask for help. They can call one of the social services agencies and say, listen, can you come in and have a conversation on substance abuse or marijuana use or how to parent or something? So even if there's nobody in the church with capacity, ask for help, right? Because we're working on this together. You talked about parents. Now, so when these young persons have run away and we've gone through all the drama and the social media posts and blah, 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 and they come back home, how can parents now begin to reconnect and rebuild trust with that child who has run away?
And that is the point where you really need to ask for help, because it means that your method of parenting hasn't necessarily been the one you thought it was.
Okay.
And I think sometimes parents are resistant to that whole idea, because then it means that I did something wrong, or I failed, or something must be wrong with the child, because then sometimes parents aren't willing to accept that there might be the problem too.
Yes.
You know, and so there is a requirement for parents to be introspective.
Okay.
To recognize that things aren't as perfect as you thought they were, and that your child running away or going somewhere is a cry for help, and that even though you have provided the best shelter and the best accommodations in the world, that our children need more than just things.
That's not enough, yes.
That there's a requirement to truly connect with our children, and sometimes we take that for granted. So sometimes parents are still texting their children to come to dinner. That's a real thing that happens, as opposed to opening up the bedroom door and asking, hey, you had a good day, can we have dinner? So just simple things. And it's not things that cost money, but when it's something that happens, it's parents become really aggressive, really defensive, really resistant. And so what we would say to parents at this point in time is that in coming to that space of realizing that something is truly wrong, that this is the point where you ask for help.
Yes.
This is the point where you seek a social worker, a therapist, a clinician, a family therapist, just to be able to have a space where there's no judgment, where there's absolute confidentiality, and where you can have those discussions both with your child, and for your child to have a space to be able to safely and healthily say what the challenges are.
Yeah, that's important, because as you mentioned earlier, some parents have trauma themselves, and some parents are wondering, what will the neighbors say? What does this say about me? And sometimes we need to move past that to look at what's in the best interest of my child.
Most definitely.
Right? In terms of help, what support system does your department offer to help the families, the parents and the children?
So Family and Social Services offer family conference, and that looks at having the whole family, the support mechanisms, etc. in place. This is the time when we call the aunties and the uncles and the cousins and the godparents, because we like to shy away from the godparents in terms of having a conversation. We make recommendations for counseling in our counseling unit, so persons will have the opportunity to attend counseling free of cost, and in terms of getting the support required during that period of time, both for the child and for parents.
Okay, that's good. We need to create more safe spaces for children where they feel heard. We already mentioned some institutions in terms of churches. Was there any place else that you could think of in terms of safe places for children?
Brownies. I'm an advocate for brownies now, because my daughter is
You're a brownies person?
I'm a brownies mommy. I'm a brownies mom.
I'm a pathfinder person.
And there you go. You know, so my daughter attends the Beehive Learning Center, and they sign up the children for brownies, and I must say it has been extremely, something I've grown extremely appreciative of. Her having a space where she meets other girls, and the boys have their own section, which is Scouts, and in terms of developing certain skills and, adventures, etc. And so that is a space where our children make connections with leaders as well, that they may feel safe with.
Yes.
Of course, there are other groups. There's karate, there's swimming, there's other things. There's gymnastics. There are options for our children to this dance class, and we have grown tremendously in all of those areas that allow for safe spaces for our children, especially in some instances where you're paying a lot of money for them to go to some of those sessions we're supposed to be saying, right? And so recognizing that we do have options, whether it be brownies, whether it be scouts, whether it be pathfinders, whether it be the Pentecostal their group as well.
Yes.
AYA, I think in the Adventist churches, the youth groups in the churches that happens on a Friday night, etc.
Yes.
So those are all spaces that our children can, go. Youth Affairs has their ambassadors, the youth parliaments. All those are opportunities for our children to have a voice.
Yes,
and utilize their voices, and allow for spaces for them to say what their challenges are.
Yes, and to thrive. And now that summer is coming, it's also important for parents to find spaces for their children to go, because they're not at school. So the schools, we don't have the babysitting aspect of the schools right now.
No.
So we have to find the vacation Bible schools. And most of the churches have camps and things like that. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the last question I had for you is that if you're working with a young person in all of the areas we mentioned, church, youth group, whatever, and you notice a child seems disconnected or at risk, what does that individual do? Who do they call? What do they do? How do they communicate with that child? What advice would you give to that person?
So one of the things that's super important is to first make connection with the individual. So you notice a child is distant, withdrawn, etc. Be interested and curious.
Yes.
How are you doing? I've noticed whatever the case is. You want us to find somebody you can talk to, that kind of stuff. Sometimes our children are super afraid of their parents too, because there's a lot going on in the homes. Yes. And sometimes parents will say, "Oh, I don't want it outside of the home." And so a lot of the times our children may be afraid to say what's happening, but allow for access. So it's important to know the emergency numbers when it comes to social services, and it is simple. 464-3531.
Oh, I've used that number a million times, so half of your referrals probably come from
me. So you make contact indicating that is one of our hotlines, and you make contact in terms of recognizing that the child may need counseling so that the referral can go to the counseling unit, or that there's something else going on with the child that might need investigation. And so our social workers will investigate those matters. And trust me, we've been on the field a lot now. Even myself has been on the field. I need a break. But we are excited when we're able to change the lives of our children. And we are excited when families, children reach out for support. So there's truly an open door policy as it relates to us. Persons do walk in and say, "I need to talk to so-and-so," or "I need to just talk to somebody." And we're grateful for the persons who have been able to do that. And as it relates to some churches also have, Gender Affairs has their hotline as well. I think it's 463-555. In terms of being able to make domestic violence reports. You have Women Against Rape. And of course, just identify persons that you're able to make connections with.
Okay. Thank you so much for that, Feona. You've been so helpful. Stay with us and we'll be right back after the break. As we wrap up this important conversation, here are a few takeaways to keep in mind. These insights highlight the deeper issues behind runaway behavior and the steps we can all take, parents, schools, churches, and communities, to better support our youth. Runaway is a symptom. Runaway behavior is often the result of deeper emotional or environmental issues, not the problem itself. Early intervention matters. Schools, churches, community groups, and families must act early to prevent crises before they happen. Reconnection takes work. Rebuilding trust with a runaway child takes empathy, patience, and often professional support. We need to ensure psychological safety at home. Parents, you need to create spaces where children feel safe expressing themselves without fear. It takes a village. Protecting and mentoring vulnerable youth is a shared responsibility across the entire community. Welcome back to Sessions with Koren. Time now for your golden nugget. When children run away, they aren't just running from home, they're running from pain. To bring them back, we must first go where they are emotionally and meet them with empathy, not just rules. Thanks for watching this episode of Sessions with Koren. Remember, our young people need safe spaces, open ears, and hearts that listen without judgment. Never underestimate the power of showing up for someone who feels lost. Catch up on past episodes on YouTube and join us next week for another powerful conversation. Until then, stay grounded, stay growing, and stay you.